you don't have to love your job, but you can't hate your job. And I'd say in the first 1, 2, 3 years of your experience at Big Law, you will have no problem keeping Torah u'mitzvos. However, your expectation should be going in that you will be spending many, if not most of your waking hours at the law firm. You have to create a system for yourself that will allow you to continue to be successful in terms of keeping Torah mitzvahs. And also, it's not about maintaining, it's about growing.
One way to look at it or look at certain developments is you're slipping. Another way to look at it is you have very high standards, maybe unrealistic high standards.
It's the difference between slipping and reassessing, and then reassessing again, because after 6 months you say, okay, look, am I able to do this now? To have things changed.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Shtark Tank. Shtark Tank is a podcast about the challenges and opportunities of being a Ben Torah in the workforce. This week, we're joined by Rabbi Yehuda Halpert, who's a shul rav, a lawyer, and an author. We're going to talk about all those things in this conversation. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be amongst those who have joined you on this podcast. It's a very esteemed group.
So let's get into it. You're a lawyer and a rabbi. Which one came first? How did that come about? Take us through the story.
Sure. So, I think a lot of times folks think that they have a plan and they're going to follow the plan and everything's just going to go A through Z. I guess that oftentimes does not happen. I am a lawyer first. So I graduated Yeshiva College. I knew I was going to go to law school. And so I started off in law school. And while I was in law school, I was learning. And one of the ways that I think a lot of the guys in NYU, one of the ways to keep your sefarim when you're in law school is to be in a program. So I was actually I did some smicha, some of the smicha classes while I was in NYU. But I did smicha. I was in smicha before law school, and then I went to law school. And then when I graduated law school, I went straight into law. I was at a firm called Weil Gotshal Manges, and I was there for 3 years with no intentions of being a shul rav, and smicha was not on the horizon. After 3 years, actually, my family and I we came to Israel, and we were in Gross for the year. And by being in Gross, that's when I kind of pivoted a little and kind of had a little bit of a awakening. And I decided I wanted to go back and try to do something in Rabbanus on some way, shape, or form. And I ended up finishing smicha. When I went back to the States, I actually went back to a law firm full time for a year or two, but it was not in the cards. At that point in time, I was looking around. I had my eyes on trying to do something in Rabbanus. I was giving shiurim on the side. I was doing different types of things. But at that point, I was looking around, and so then I actually switched from the law firm I was at to another law firm. And I was at Debevoise in Plimpton. And while I was at Debevoise working as an attorney, an opportunity came up for what they call a quote unquote Shabbos only shul, which is what Congregation Abad Shalom is. Congregation Abad Shalom is it's a community in Teaneck, New Jersey. Teaneck, New Jersey is kind of split on terms of different sections, and one section has a lot of apartments, has a lot of different apartment complexes, and they have a shul there that's in the high school, and it's right over there. So there are many shuls in Teaneck, and there's really no need for another fully functioning shul right there where those apartments are. But in terms of a Shabbos shul, people choosing not to walk so far and just having like a nice, more communal shul. So there's a shul there that meets on Shabbos only. So my thinking at the time was that I would dip my toe in, and I figured I could do a type of pulpit or stella that only had the Shabbos obligations. And because of the demographic of the community, I'd say a lot of the pastoral needs of a full-time rabbanos, a full-time community, were certainly much less. As I like to say to people, I really focus on shalom zachers and brisses. Those are the main rabbinic things that I'm able to focus on. And because of that, I was able to balance that while being a lawyer. And, over the years, things kind of shift back and forth. But as long as you're flexible, you can kind of get things to work.
And can you take us back to that time in Gross? You mentioned that there was some sort of awakening. Was that like a certain Rebbe you had an influence on you, a certain experience that you were able to draw on? I wonder what more made you see things differently.
That's an interesting question. I don't know if the year in Gross was an awakening in the sense of like this epiphany, or if it was just a little bit of a moment of transition in our lives. I think certainly when most of the people who are in Gross, for people who are not familiar with Gross Kollel, that's the Yeshiva University's Kollel in Israel. And kind of the folks in Gross break into kind of two categories. I think actually I haven't been there in a very long time, but at least when I was there were folks who were kind of using it as a stepping stone to making Aliyah. There were folks who wanted to go into Rabbanus and were using it as part of the smicha program. And then there were folks who just wanted to learn and they were not really sure. So I think when you're surrounded with a chaver like that and a group of people who are very focused on kind of responsibility to Klal Yisrael, to Am Yisrael, and really very idealistic people. And obviously, Rabbi David Miller, who runs the Kollel, and Rabbi Kefet, and Rabbi Danny Mann, who was there at the time. These are all people who influence you both by their words, but also by their actions, and you see the impact that they were able to have on people. And I think it stirs something inside of you to say, you know what, hey, look, I think I can do that also. I think also coming off of not going straight from YU into Gris Kollel, but kind of having been in the workforce for 3 years, I think you really kind of you see the contrast between a very kind of all-in full-time focus on work and career and professionalism. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I think it's very important. But, that kind of focus, and you see people you're always looking kind of people who are 5, 10, 15 years ahead of you. And you see, are those people, where do they end up? Kind of what's their focus? What are their priorities? What have they accomplished? And sometimes you look at yourself and say, okay, look, if in 15 years from now, if that's what I've accomplished, is that really what I want? Can I do something else? Can I do something different? And I think kind of so taking that year and kind of looking around saying, you know what? I don't necessarily want to see myself at a law firm in 20 years from now having accomplished those types of things without also having given back on some of these other areas. So again, I don't know if that's an epiphany. I don't know what's if there's there's very rarely that kind of that moment in time, but I think that experience definitely led me when we went back to the States and we were back in the law firm to kind of be continuously looking around to be able to do more.
And when you were looking at these people who are 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ahead of you, the way you formulated it, it was more of a sur meira. There was a certain something there that you didn't want to be, that you said people were all in. Were there people who you looked at and said, wow, that person is someone who I want to take after, someone who was already balancing Kodesh and Chol and professionalism and rabbinics, that you said, maybe I want to be like him? Or is more just like you wanted a new path and it was a little bit different than what you were seeing amongst your sort of peers and seniors?
Yeah. So I just want to clarify one thing. I don't, obviously it's the expression kind of rolls off the tongue, so, sumirah. I just want to clarify. It wasn't that I was in an area of Ra, in the sense that the folks who were fully focused on their careers in any way, shape, or form were pursuing Ra. But I think it was more an issue of kind of priorities and goal oriented. So, and especially at a law firm, once you're there for a bunch of years and you're on a more of a partner track, you are all in that sense, and it's very hard to create space and make room for other areas. So, and again, so I don't think it's an issue of Ra. I think it's an issue of priorities, and kind of ordering kind of life goals and objectives. In terms of folks who are inspiring, there were definitely folks at the law firm that I was at who were balancing, I'd say, kind of commitment to Torah and a full legal life quite a bit. One of the partners who I was there was giving a full-time Daf Yomi shiur in Brooklyn. Subsequently, I think a few years ago, he retired, and I think he's learning full-time. There are other folks in the firm who were very, who were very, very committed and Orthodox Jews. Again, a lot of the folks in the firm were truly committed to their legal craft, and that was an all-encompassing pursuit. And they were very good at it. They were excellent at it, and they were leaders in their fields. But I just felt that there was more that I wanted to do than just professionalism and just to be successful professionally in terms of what I was looking to accomplish.
I want to maybe go a little deeper. You are talking about a very important point here, and I'm not meaning to call out anybody specific or by name or not by name, but if you have someone coming to you for advice, he's coming out of, he learns in the yeshiva system, the year in Israel, yeshiva university, he wants to become a lawyer. Do you think there's something wrong if he will say to you, I want to be one of those lawyers who is really at the top of my legal craft, even though that's going to come all in, al cheshbon, my other things? Is that something that you view as something wrong for someone from our chera, for lack of a better term, that we should objectively, are there two good paths here? Or for B'nai Torah guys like me and you, they should really be thinking about maybe more of your mindset versus the other mindset, which is maybe comes from more of the secular world?
That's a very deep question. I can only give you my personal opinion on it. So to be clear, I think if someone begins down the path of their legal profession and feels that they want to be, this is their calling, this is their passion, and they feel that they can be successful in it, and they can be at the top of their profession, or even not even the top of the profession, they can be as good as they can be in their legal path, and they pursue it, and they are shomer Torah mitzvos, and they are making a kiddush Hashem, and they are acting professionally and ethically and morally. I think 100% that's a total lechatchila. I think if that individual has come to the conclusion that this is their tafkid, this is what they're good at, this drives them, and they're able to, and they're doing it in a proper a proper way, and they're making a Kiddush Hashem, and they're showing up to work every day, and people are looking at them and saying, "Wow, this is he's he's doing it and he's doing well." I think 100%. If that's your calling and that's your tafkid, then I think that's great. And at that same time, would I say to somebody, okay, look, I think you need to make time within you going in all in to be the best bankruptcy lawyer in New York City, or to be the best M&A lawyer in New York City. You need to make time for family and for Torah and for mitzvos and for chesed, and to build that in. And I think you can. I think in big law, I think it's hard to do many. It'll be hard to do many hours of that, just because there's so many hours that you're going to be at the law firm. But I know many people who are highly successful attorneys, who are highly successful Jews, who are highly successful shomer Torah mitzvos. And I think, as I would never say that they have not pursued a lechatchila path. And I think for them, they have done a tremendous job. They've demonstrated to the world, and kind of, look, I'm a product of YU, I'm a product of Torah Mada. They've demonstrated to the world that you can succeed at the highest levels in the secular workplace and still maintain Torah values. And not only maintain Torah values, you can be a role model in Or LaGoyim, and you can be successful in both areas. It's hard, it's tough, it's a challenge. But so what? That's life is supposed to be a challenge. But I don't know Yula. So no, I don't think. I think that's 100% a lechatchila path. I think the question is for each individual. I say to people all the time, you don't have to love your job. 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100, 3 out of 100 people get lucky and they love their job. They play center field for the New York Yankees, they love their job. Or alternatively, some people are deeply passionate about what they do and they love their job, and that's great, and they're lucky. You don't have to love your job, but you can't hate your job. You can't, or at least we live in, we are very lucky that we live in a world where, for the most part, if you hate your job, you can switch careers. And that always wasn't always the case. For a lot of people, it was just, you didn't get to think about whether you liked your job or you didn't like your job. You just needed a job and you needed to put food on the table, and that was it. But thank God we live in now a society and in a culture where you can kind of choose. So you don't have to love your job, but you can't hate your job. So if you come to the law firm every day and you enjoy what you're doing and you're interacting and you get a sipuk hanefesh and you're good at it and you feel like you are really contributing to Yishuv HaOlam, then I think that's great. If you do it in Israel, then you're also making mitzvah of Yishuv Haaretz. But if you're doing it in the States, you have the opportunity to make a Kiddush Hashem and to support your family, which is a mitzvah. If you look at the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan says, beferish, you leave shul and then you go to work, because going to work is a mitzvah, because it allows you to support your family and allows you to do positive things in the community. So I think that's all 100% lechatchila. But for whatever reason, for me personally, I don't know if it was I always had a cheshek for chinuch, or again, maybe it was that exposure and growth to seeing people who were so excited about a different path, a different pursuit. Somewhere in my mind, I always had a cheshek that just being, I shouldn't say just, but being a successful lawyer was not how I saw myself, was not where I wanted to see. And again, not in any way, shape, or form negating the value of doing that for somebody who sees themselves as that is their calling.
So you touched on so many important points there. One I want to follow up on is the experience of being a lawyer at a big law firm. It's actually a topic that a bunch of listeners have reached out and requested that we talk about here. I'll give a shout out. I believe the first person to ask me way back when was my friend Avi Ash, and others as well. And it's taken us a while. You're the first big law lawyer, I believe, we've had on the podcast. So tell us a little bit about what that's like. Is it a very challenging place to be a Ben Torah? Is it an easy place to be a Ben Torah? There are certain stereotypes of being very, very intense and very cutthroat. So tell us what your experience has been as being a person who keeps Torah values primary, but also has spent many, many days, months, and years in big law.
So we talk about big law, and I'd say, on one hand, you can stereotype and you can kind of paint with a broad brush all big law firms, and then at the same time, every firm is a little different. Every individual's path is a little different. But I'll just talk about big law generally. I don't think so. And for kind of folks who have not been through the system for big law, what I think defines big law, so I'll define it for 30 seconds and then I'll go into a little bit more. What I think defines big law is a little bit of a machine where every year 75 to 100 new lawyers are going to come into a law firm, and that law firm is going to do a range of 5 to 7 different types of legal work for very large clients. And you start at year one and you kind of go through the system, and there's a system, and there's your first year, your second year, your third year, then you become a mid-level, then you become a senior, then you become a counselor, then you become a partner, whatever. And there is this system here. And in that system, I think stage one, you absolutely, as a shomer Shabbos, shomer Torah mitzvos Jew living in New York City in 2025, can go into big law and be successful as a lawyer and be successful as a Torah observant Jew. I think there's no doubt of that. People talk about, oh, we live in a Medina Shel Chesed and everything, and it is so true. Like, it's not even a question anymore that if you're wearing a yarmulke, people assume that you're going to be Sabbath observers. There are so many Sabbath observers in big law. There are so many people who keep kosher in big law. There's kosher food. There are other partners who have been successful in big law who have paved the way. As long as you are consistent and stand by your Torah values from day one, and you consistently project that these things are important to you, the people at the law firm will respect that. And I'd say in the first 1, 2, 3 years of your experience at big law, you will have no problem keeping Torah u'mitzvos. However, and this is not necessarily unique to big law, your expectation should be going in that you will be spending many, many, if not most of your waking hours at the law firm working and billing. And look, there's no doubt that, you have to know that going in, and you have to create a system for yourself that will allow you to continue to be successful in terms of keeping Torah mitzvahs. And also, it's not, I think a lot of people talk about when they go to the year in Israel, it's not about maintaining, it's about growing. Or, it's not, and obviously at different points in your life, there are different, you have different priorities. But so again, if you can build into your system, big law usually starts a little later. Bankers get in early, brokers get in early. Big law in New York usually starts closer to 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. So, you can build in time to learn in the morning. And if you want to have chabrusas and you want to be kovea itim, you can do that in the morning. If you wait to set up a chabrusa at 8 p.m. and then 3 months later say, I'm so sorry, I've canceled 85% of my chabrusas because at 8 p.m. I wasn't home, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So it really is. It is something that can be achieved, but you have to realize two things. As I said, the vast majority of your time is going to be spent in this profession, and you are going to be surrounded with people who are very focused on being successful in that profession. And success oftentimes translates into financial success. While financial success is an important part of, again, supporting your family and then being a productive member of society, productive member of the Jewish community, should that be your absolute priority? And when you're surrounded by people who will put making money as priority number one, you have to be careful that perspective, which is not necessarily consistent with all of your other values, does not overtake you. And I think there are people who are successful at that. I think there are people who stray. Some people see that and go 180% the other way. Some people see it and it slowly seeps in. Some people, it has a subtle effect and you don't know. But I think the key in big law, just like in any other job, is surrounding yourself with people who are good people. And good people doesn't mean good Jews. Good people just means good people. There are plenty of non-Jews in or not mitzvahs observant Jews in big law who are good people, and they value family, and they value doing the right thing, and they take their career seriously, and they're ethical and about that. And there are lots of people in big law, just like in every other profession, who are not. And if you end up surrounding yourself with people who are living values that are not consistent with you, it will be very, very tough. Either you'll constantly be in a battle, or you'll start to slip to the other side, or, so that's what I was saying before, is that not all big law is the same, because a law firm could have 500, 600, 700 lawyers. Your experience in one department could be diametrically opposed to someone's experience in a different department. And it's just because people matter. So if the 20 people that you work with are really, really good people, and you're at a firm that has a reputation of being a really crummy firm, but you work with 20 good people, you can have a very good experience. And you could be at a great firm where the reputation is good people, family driven, family values, ethical, moral, they won't cut corners, et cetera, but you're a group of 4 people, or 4 tough, difficult people, you will have a very bad experience. And you have to, to learn how to navigate that.
And so you were referring to a number of challenges. You spoke about sort of just halacha, kashrus, Shabbos. You spoke about time management and scheduling and how much time. And then you mentioned the third thing, which I guess encompasses those two and many other factors, which is sort of peer pressure and your own set of values versus the values of people around you. Would you say that the peer pressure one, you seem to emphasize that, was that one of the biggest challenges that you've experienced, that you see people experience, as sort of part A of the question? And part B is, has your rabbinic hat helped you in this regard or been more challenging for you in this regard? So what are your main coping mechanisms with the challenges that these situations bring to you?
So on the peer pressure point, I think the peer pressure point has a tremendous impact on individuals, and it can really go both ways. I've seen folks who kind of, when they graduated law school or came into the firm, would not in 1,000 years have thought that they would ever eat dairy, eat out dairy at a client meeting, or go to a restaurant and order something, and then at some point in time, something slips, or someone, they're surrounded by people who are maybe a little less careful on some of these things, and at first they're only ordering salad, and then then they're ordering other things, and kind of that can start a slide. Or if you're around people who are working till, if Shkia is at 5:15 on a winter week, they're working till 5:15, and then they're walking home, all the thing that next thing you're working till 5:30 and walking home, then you're working till 6, and and like that kind of thing slips. And if you're with other people who are kind of doing that same type of thing, it can become very easy for that to be your new normal. And then all of a sudden, 2 or 3 years later, you look back at what you're doing today versus what you would have thought you would have been doing, and you're like, you can't believe that you're there. On the other end of the spectrum, I have witnessed firsthand someone who was at the firm who was misguyer because he saw he really was. This was not the sole impetus, but he was really impacted by the way the other shomer Shabbos lawyers at the firm were and interacted, and kind of their focus on other important things. And I've witnessed people who came into the firm less religious who became more religious over time. And one thing I will say to people, it's kind of funny because mincha is very important. It's a mitzvah, right? You have to, it's a mitzvah d'oraisa, mitzvah d'rabbanan. To daven mincha with a minyan at Big Law, I think can be a career and a religious life-altering aspect. Because if you're, with everything going on in Big Law, and this is true for investment banking or anything, like to stop in the middle of your day and spend that 10 or 15 minutes davening with a minyan, and therefore seeing other people who are even more senior to you or more successful than you, who are also stopping and taking that 10 or 15 minutes. And even that 30 seconds of conversation after mincha or before, like, it makes a difference. It changes your whole day. And then you're continuously interacting with people, at least for a few minutes a day, who have a similar set of values with you, and who are prioritizing davening mincha with a minyan in the middle of everything that's going on. Now, look, there's no doubt that over the course of a career in Big Law, there are going to be days that you're not going to make a minyan. Like, it's just, you could be at a meeting that starts at 11 and doesn't end until 9 p.m. Like that happens. It sounds crazy. You tell that to people, like, what do you mean you can't step out? Like, well, you can't step out, right? So, like, okay, speak to your local Orthodox rabbi about the dinim of tashlumin in that case. But if that's the outlier, and you're able to put a mincha minyan into your Big Law life, it happens to be that at different points in times, when I was on the east side, in our old building, downstairs from us was Schulte, Ruth, and Zabel. They had a minyan at Schulte. So again, you were able to get a minyan in the building. But sometimes you have to walk a block or two to Citibank or to here or there. But the last few years, we've actually had a minyan at the firm, which again it changes your whole day. And in terms of just being impacted by your surroundings, I strongly encourage somebody, even if you weren't a diehard 7 days a week, 365 days a year mincha with a minyan goer, before you start working, when you're thinking of different things that are going to anchor you, I would strongly advise that. And then I also throw this out as, from a networking perspective, going to mincha is a great networking perspective. Because, like, if you're a second-year associate, you're not hanging out with a lot of partners on a regular basis or a lot of senior associates. But at mincha, everyone's there, and there'll be like 3 partners and 2 senior associates and 1 junior associate. And it's just an opportunity to meet and interact with people who are more senior to you, who your peers and colleagues at the firm are not hanging out with, and you have this additional connection. So that's a mashalo lishma balishma idea, but I think mincha is from a peer pressure perspective, is one of those things that can tip you one way or the other.
I'll just mention that I work here at a nonprofit in the Negev called Adi Negev Nachat Iran, and I have a chavrusa, quote unquote, with a gardener, part of our gardening staff on the campus here, who is one of the biggest Talmidei Chachamim I've ever met. And we have like a little chavrusa shop. We walk down the stairs together. We'll share a vort. We'll ask a question. We'll schmooze for a few minutes. And I really cherish that. And it really does have a big impact on my day. So I appreciate that a lot. You were talking about slips, people who start with a certain standard and then it's a little bit lower. And there are obviously different types of slips, whether it's talking about a halachic idea or a chomer that maybe you had and didn't have. And I've actually been thinking about that a lot recently because there's certainly this idea of the slippery slope. And, you start out as a young idealistic yeshiva bachar, or you're in Gross and whatever, and you start working and life comes at you. So one way to look at it or look at certain developments is you're slipping. Another way to look at it is you have very high standards, maybe unrealistic high standards coming out of you're single, you don't have kids, you don't have a job, you don't have this and that. So you develop certain standards which maybe shouldn't be there or not really fair to hold yourself to. And therefore, it's not necessarily a slip in all areas. It could just be coming to a little more of a realistic routine or habits or standards that actually, Torah's Chaim, it's supposed to be relevant for us and realistic for us. So do you have any thoughts about that, about defining good standards? Because not every slip is necessarily a bad slip based on what I've been thinking about. So I'm wondering what your take is.
Sure. So I'm going to respond to that, I think, with an anecdote outside of big law, but kind of the big finance. I have a friend who was at Goldman Sachs, and he had twins. Thank God, they were healthy, great. And he went to his Rav, and he said, "Look, I'm at Goldman Sachs. I'm working a lot. I've got twins at home." He said, I don't have any time to learn. I just don't. Like, there's no time. And it was like, what about on the bus? He was like, I fall asleep the second I'm on the bus. I'm up all night. Like, what about here? What about the guy? I'm a serious guy. Like, I'm not trying. There's that famous Musar board. If I only have 5 minutes a day, what should I learn? I should learn Musar, because then you realize you have more than 5 minutes. They're like, no, I don't. The Rav's response was, that's a very honest assessment of where you are. And you have to realize that at different points in life, you have different tafkids. And right now, with, you're pursuing this profession, we can discuss whether this is where you should be or not, but you're pursuing this and you're pursuing it well and you're doing it well. And you have 2 little babies at home. Said, learning Torah is not your tafkid right now. And he said to him, he goes, listen, come back in 6 months or come back in a year and let's talk about your schedule again. And I think that's a very different way to think about slipping or chumras, et cetera, which is, you start big law and you say, look, I'm going to take a neder that I'm going to do daf yomi in the morning and I'm going to do halacha yomi at night and I'm going to do da-da-da-da. And 6 months later, it's not working. So is that a slip? Well, if you just kind of let it go, it's a slip. But if after 6 months you say, let me take stock and reassess as to what's going on over here and say, you know what? The daf yomi in the morning at big law, I can do that. I actually know somebody who had a chavrusa with a non-religious Jew because he was doing daf yomi in the morning and he started coming into the office earlier and that guy saw him and they started. And, it was an amazing Kiruv moment. But anyway, so I could do the daf yomi in the morning, but I can't do that. So you know what? Right now I'm going to reassess and I'm going to say, this is where I am. And I can do this, I can't do that. And you can kind of go down the line. There's a difference between slipping and reassessing, and then reassessing again, because after 6 months you say, okay, look, am I able to do this now? To have things changed. And also maybe 2 years later, you say to yourself, okay, look, the reality is that I'm never going to be able to have a chavrusa in the morning and a chavrusa at night. What does that mean for me spiritually and religiously in terms of what my goals are, what my objectives are? Can I maintain a positive kind of religious growth with a chavrusa only in the morning and not at night? Or maybe when I'm more senior, things will change and I'll be able to do this. So that's constantly reassessment and that's a positive growth outlook, as opposed to what kind of describes slipping, which is, I want to do this, and I didn't do that. And, I used to be makbid on ABC and now I'm not makbid on that XYZ, where this is kind of this gradual descent, the classic slippery slope, where you're not even aware that it's necessarily happening. And then it's only like 5 years later, you look back and you're like, wow, how did I get here? So I think your point is a fair point, which is a lot of people come into work on day one and they've been so loaded with the idea, rightfully so, that you need to buttress yourself and you need to strengthen yourself and therefore do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And 3 or 4 months later or a year later, they realize that's not possible. So as long as you're honest with yourself and you're saying to yourself, these are the things I can and can't do, and now I'm going to reassess, that's something different. So another example. So there's obviously a lot of halachic literature about shaking hands with women or people of the opposite gender. A lot of times people will come into the law firm and be like, this is something I'm going to be machmir on, and no matter what. And then as their career progresses, they realize that, it's something that they want to take on. They want to change their approach to this issue. And, again, there's valid halachic basis on all sides of that machlokas. But the question is, why are you changing your approach? Are you changing your approach because you realize that, the halachic, that in terms of how your career is, it's very important for you to shake hands, and halachically you think it's okay because it's not an issue of derech chiba? Or do you just not care about that issue anymore? Like you've become so calcify is the wrong word. You become so accustomed to the very physical interactions that take place in a lot of secular workplaces that you just don't even think about that as being a halach issue, because everyone shake hands. As a matter of fact, everyone does much more than shaking hands. So like, what's wrong with me that I'm like, those are two. So you have two people who walked into the law firm not shaking hands with women, and 2 years later they're both shaking hands with women, but they're in two very different places. One person has come to the conclusion that it's halachically okay, and the other person is their whole world outlook has changed. So I think that's an important way to analyze and think about quote unquote slipping.
Right. Just programming note. We have 13 more minutes left. So we're going to maybe try to hit on some of these other topics on maybe slightly briefer if we can, if possible. So we're going to do the book and COVID, and then the war in Israel, and then the rapid fire. Seder?
Just say,
okay.
and
So
I was
you recently came out with here we go. I had it. Don't worry. Okay, so we've covered so many important topics, and I really appreciate all of the experiences that you bring to these issues. You recently came out with a book, so mazel tov on that. It's about COVID, which we recently or around half a year ago now. We're in the 5-year anniversary of various milestones, and I remember the Rosh Hashanah of COVID and the Yom Kippur of COVID and the Sukkot of COVID. Obviously, brings back a lot of mixed memories. So tell us a little bit about the book, why you decided to write it, and what the goal was in putting this together.
Okay, great. Thank you. So first of all, I'll take issue. On one hand, it is definitely a book, a sefer about COVID. You can't escape that. But I like to tell people it's not a COVID book. What it is a sefer that describes how we as a community struggled and overcame with adversity. It happens to be that the adversity of the topic was COVID, but the lessons and those interactions, I think, apply in all sorts of different situations going forward, which is why, although I fought with the editor, I won, at least I think I won. And the title is Speaking to an Empty Shul, Timeless Lessons from Unprecedented Times. So on one hand, we thought that what was going on in COVID was unprecedented, but at the same time, the lessons and the takeaways from those experiences, I think really are timeless and can help a person can help. The book is a combination, I'd say, history book and a sefer. So if you're into history, I think it'll be very interesting, because what it really does is it tracks right from the week before the shutdown. That's the first drasha in the book. And then after that, after the shutdown, what started happening was that the community really had no way to interact. So I started sending out voice notes and emails before Shabbos and saying to people, listen, usually we have the drasha when you're in shul on Shabbos. Here's the drasha, print it out, and you can read it on Shabbos. If you really want to be, makbid, you can read it before Musaf when you're davening in your apartment. And I have, for those first 3 or 4 months, I had all of these drashas that I was sending out. And what I did is, so in the book, before each drasha, there's like 4 or 5 sentences of a historical blurb. It's kind of like, this is what was going on. We just shut down. Or you mentioned before Rosh Hashanah, before Shavuos, we were about to open up. Or like the drasha on the week that we first started outdoor minyanim. Or the drasha on the week where we, Yom Kippur we had outside. So there's always a blurb as to what was going on historically. And many more things. It was actually a crazy year. I mean, COVID was crazy, but it was a crazy year. You had January 6th, you had George Floyd, you had the Supreme Court nomination. There was so much stuff going on, and people forget. And so many times people stop me and they say, oh, I saw your sefer, I saw your book. I didn't remember that had happened. I didn't remember that we were actually shut down for that long, etc. So that's what the sefer does. It kind of tracks one full year from the week before the shutdown till the 1-year anniversary of the shutdown. And you'll see you get the feeling the first few weeks, you really get the goal is to kind of put you back into that place. And then as we open up, the drashas open up, and it addresses a whole slew of different issues. But that's the goal and the objective of the sefer. So if you like history, could be good for you. If you like If you just need a drasha for a bar mitzvah, it could also be good because there's lots of drashas in there. But that's kind of the overview of the sefer.
Yeah, so we will post a link in the show notes, and it sounds very interesting. And the way you framed it is also very important. It's, lessons about adversity, lessons about community, lessons about change and adapting. So I'm wondering, you also have been a rabbi through the last 2 years of October 7th and the aftermath. So what were the main sort of things that you learned during COVID that helped you as a leader and a rabbi navigate this other very adverse times with its own differences, its own challenges, but especially with your framing, the goal was to learn those lessons that can be applied in future crises. So you definitely got a chance to do that again. So I'm wondering what were some of the main lessons that you applied?
I think one important lesson that I gleaned out of the COVID experience, especially kind of in the Rabbanos, is that so many people, you think there's going to be a standard response to a certain type of adversity. And what we saw in COVID was that people reacted diametrically opposed to the exact same stimuli. Some people were, kind of mentally dealt with COVID by saying, I'm going to take control of the situation and I'm going to wipe down everything. And other people said, Hefker, we can never control this, we can never save this, and therefore I'm not going to do anything. It's like you saw how people really responded differently to the exact same stimuli. And as a Rav and as a community, the key to keeping a community together is to make space for different people to react to these different situations differently, and still within the framework of a community. And if that means each person being sensitive to how the other person is going to react and somehow changing their behavior, et cetera. You'll see it in a bunch of the different drushes, especially at the most severe times when people were really stressed and there was not a lot of information and you saw people reacting very differently from a communal perspective. There was tension around those issues, and we addressed that in the Sefer. And I think October 7th had a lot of that as well. Obviously, it was a extremely traumatic event. It was a physically traumatic event in Israel, but it was an emotionally traumatic event in Chutz La'aretz. And because of social media and people and the social media aspect of the war, people really, you had people who had very similar PTSD type responses in the United States who were not there, but who were so involved and had family there, et cetera. And to see different people reacting and different people wanting to take action or not take action. And then in the United States, there was a lot of issues of anti-Semitism. And all of a sudden, like you had all these protests and people who had been wearing their yarmulkes to work forever were thinking about taking their yarmulkes off. Should we protest publicly? Should we not protest publicly? All those types of issues, so on one hand, it was great to see the community coalesce about the fact that something needed to be done. But it was obvious very soon that different people had felt very, very strongly as to that different things should be done. And even just take something in terms of we were all giving money. Who should we be giving money to? How do you prioritize the different stuff? Should you be giving it to the soldiers? Should you be giving it to the widows? Should you be giving it to the country? Should you be giving and these there were great debates to have because it meant that everyone in the community wanted to do something, but people felt very strongly that there were different best ways forward. And as a community Rav, I think one of the challenges was to bring people together and to get them to acknowledge that different people had valid opinions and that it was important as a community that we act together and figure out what the best way forward is. So that was kind of just off the top of my head. That's kind of like one example of a timeless lesson, which unfortunately got applied very quickly. A second thing also is kind of like the tension between the individual and the community. We mentioned that we were just 5 years out. If anyone's very interested in the 5-year passage with by Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, who's the editor of Tradition, we put together an online panel of 6 or 7 Jewish professionals who were reacting to what happened, how you view COVID 5 years later. There were some pulpit rabbis, there were some educators, there were some mental health professionals in that symposium. If you're interested, you could just check it out on Tradition Online. But one of the people there is a woman by the name of Gila Muskin, who's the executive director of Yesh Tikva, which is an organization that deals with infertility. And in both COVID and October 7th, you had this parallel where there was this huge communal disruption and there was mass issues. And then at the same time, you had individuals who were dealing with a very important but totally personal issue in terms of their building their own family lives. So in the midst of COVID, all infertility treatment stopped. So here you had somebody who was saying, look, the world's coming to an end. Am I supposed to be upset about the fact that my fertility struggle is part of that? Like, how can you compare that? There are millions of people dying. But at the same time, you have an individual who's truly struggling with that issue. It's still a live issue for them. It's just an individual issue. And you had that exact same thing on October 7th, where you had people who were like, you have all sorts of people who have individual issues. And they're like, how can I even talk about my issue because Am Yisrael is going through this? And the answer to that is there is room for both. There has to be space for both. And you have to learn how to manage both of those. So I think that was also another another lesson that we kind of were able to take forward and we saw from it.
That is fascinating. Last question before we go to our lightning round. I'm wondering for you personally, October 7th, how has it changed you, changed your approach? You also told me that your son is now serving in the army, which is very exciting and very important. So how's that experience been for you, being a father of a Chayal Boded from a distance, even harder in a certain sense? So I wonder if you could just reflect personally on your journey over the last 2 years.
Well, this is Shark Tank, Shtark Tank. So I will take that question and bring it back to the law firm. October 7th had a unintended consequence, which is that many very unaffiliated Jews all of a sudden became affiliated again. And there was great opportunity in the law firm and in any secular setting to allow unaffiliated Jews or minimally affiliated Jews to come back and connect in whatever way they wanted to connect. So we have a Jewish affinity group in the law firm. Law firms have these affinity groups. They're like for all sorts of different things. So we have a Jewish affinity group. The Jewish affinity group and the Mincha group used to be the same, or the Jewish affinity group and the kosher group used to be identical. After October 7th, the Jewish affinity group became huge because there were so many Jews who wanted to somehow reach out and be part of it. And there's great opportunity for kiruv, and not even for kiruv, but just kind of opening up and allowing other non-religious Jews to see what it is to be a religious Jew. And I think that immediately after October 7th, it was palpable. Obviously, thank God, as the ceasefire now and as kind of things are, I think it will go away a little, but to not let that opportunity slip by. And if there are people out there who have the opportunity to interact with secular Jews or less affiliated Jews who have expressed an interest, don't let that slip away. I think that's something that the Jewish identity, which has come out of October 7th, which is a result of the anti-Semitism, and you can have all those drushes about how, the Netziv, why anti-Semitism, etc. So I think that's one very palpable and powerful reaction that we can take with us in the secular workforce out of October 7th.
Okay, let's go to our lightning round, rapid fire, 3 short questions, 3 hopefully short answers. We're almost at the clock change, but we still have a little bit of time left on Shabbos afternoons. So what's your favorite use of the time on Shabbos afternoons when it's not super short?
Yeah. You're saying not Erev Shabbos, Shabbos afternoon. Shabbos afternoon is when I read, I would say, kind of pleasure reading, which for me is kind of Jewish history or history of halacha or those types of sefarim that, so that's usually a good period of time where you can carve out like an hour or two. It's relatively quiet, depending on what's going on with the kids or what happened that Shabbos, etc. And you can kind of get that kind of reading done, which I don't usually get a chance to do during the week. And I also especially will sometimes read sefarim in not sefarim, but academic books in Hebrew, which requires much more concentration. I can't usually do that quickly. So on a Shabbos afternoon when it's quiet, I could sit down and kind of do that type of learning / reading. That's what I really enjoy on Shabbos afternoon.
And when you're preparing a shir, preparing a drasha, parsha shavua, or other topics that you are teaching about, speaking about, what's your go-to sefer to get inspiration, to get ideas, to get direction?
So my family has a little bit of an affinity to Rav Diskin because my grandfather was at the Diskin orphanage, and Rav Diskin has a few different sefarim on Parsha. So I usually, as Akar Satov to Rav Diskin for helping my grandfather so many years ago, I usually will try to go there first and pull something off the shelf and see if he has something relevant. If not, after that, if notwithstanding the emotional connection, I'm not able to find what I'm looking for, then I'm a big Torah Tamima fan. I think there's a lot of nuggets there that you can. Usually, the whole drasha can't be a Torah Tamima piece, but the Torah Tamima can bring you to something else that can eventually get you a drasha, either Torah Tamima or Torah Shlema. That's like those are the go-to.
Okay, we will remind our listeners about a very fascinating episode that we did about the Torah Tamima. We can link to that in the show notes as well. But thank you for that. Those are all very interesting sefarim. And finally, if you had to choose a new job in a new industry, something you've never done before, maybe something you dreamed of doing as a kid, what would that be?
Okay, so I don't know if this is allowed, but just to go back to the Torah Tamima for a moment, I also have an affinity to the Torah Tamima because my other grandfather on my mother's side wrote an index to the Torah Tamima, which my mother edited. So I need to give a shout out to that as well. So it's actually, you look at the index that you add to the Torah Tamima. So I don't know if you could splice that back in, but that's, I do want to be on record there for both sides of the family, or Diskin and the Torah Tamima. In terms of if I wanted to do a different profession, I always say I would like to be an architect. There's something very appealing to being able to design something and then see it concrete and built. I think both as a rabbi and a lawyer, we very much deal in the abstract. So I don't know if I would actually enjoy it, but it seems like it would just be great to like build something and have it like be there with rocks and steel and screws and bolts. So maybe an architect.
Yehuda Halpert, thank you so much for joining us, and I really appreciate learning from you from all your experiences as a rabbi and as a lawyer, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the time. This has been fascinating. Very much enjoyable.